Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. It was 30 years ago that a previous Governor Cuomo went before the Democratic National Convention in San Francisco and spoke passionately about the tale of two cities, describing a country where festering inequality threatened the very promise of the American dream. Move ahead 3 decades and we're seeing a classic power struggle between our current Governor Cuomo and Mayor Bill de Blasio, who used Mario Cuomo's tale of two cities as the centerpiece of his electoral victory last year, over how much power New York City should have to manage its own affairs, and whether we in the city are vassals to Albany overlords who could, should they see fit, vote us out of existence tomorrow. The issues the city has struggled with Albany over range across the civic spectrum: charter schools, Staten Island secession, congestion pricing, red light cameras, how much rent we pay, and now whether the city can even lower its speed limit. Most publicly, the battle is joined over de Blasio's push to allow the city to raise taxes on those making over $500,000 a year to pay for pre-kindergarten and after-school programs. Cuomo says he will put up state money to expand pre-K, though not as much for the city as de Blasio's tax would raise, and not providing the guaranteed revenue stream the mayor says he needs to keep the program up and running. The Daily News says de Blasio should take Cuomo's pre-K money offer and run, giving up the tax fight. The Albany Times-Union and Middletown Times-Herald Record ask why Cuomo doesn't let the city pay for its own pre-K and use the rest of the money for pre-K across the state. Newsday blasts de Blasio for bad manners for proposing a tax hike in a state election year. Cuomo, who as federal housing secretary once hired de Blasio, has even turned de Blasio's signature theme on its head, saying allowing the city to tax itself to pay for pre-K would create a tale of two states, one where city kids would get ahead, while upstate cities where families are as poor or poorer than city families would not get the benefit. Cuomo makes similar arguments in rejecting de Blasio's push for allowing the city to set its own minimum wage, saying it would pit cities against each other. In any case, we're witnessing in sharper focus than usual the battle between New York City and the state capital over to what degree the city has home rule over its own affairs. We're joined by 4 New Yorkers who engage in the civic debate over this issue and so much more. Daniel DeSalvo is a professor of political science at City College and a senior fellow at Manhattan Institute Center for State and Local Leadership. Michael Aronson is a member of the Daily News editorial board. Jaime Estades is the president and co-founder of the Latino Leadership Institute in New York and a lecturer at Rutgers University. And Bertha Lewis is the president of the Black Institute and a veteran civic and political activist for more years than either one of us cares to admit. Michael, let me start with you. You cover Albany and the political shenanigans upstate and downstate. Are we seeing the usual fight between the city and the state, or is there something more intense and unusual here?
Well, it's a little early. I mean, de Blasio's been in office, what, about 2 months? And from the beginning, he said this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to do this pre-K expansion and pay for it with the surtax. And Cuomo came, actually during the campaign, he met with us at the paper, and he said, I'm for pre-K, but we don't need the tax. And he's been consistent in that, and de Blasio won't take yes for an answer. So he's trying to argue and persuade Albany to do this in the legislature, and Cuomo and the Republicans in the Senate are saying, no, we'll set it up for you. I think de Blasio he wants 2 things. He wants pre-K and he also wants the tax. So he doesn't want to accept half a loaf, and he doesn't want to admit that he just wants both. He says, well, your way to fund it isn't going to be enough and it's not guaranteed. And Cuomo says, yeah, it's guaranteed, it's guaranteed. But de Blasio in his campaign had 2 objectives. He wanted to, in the style of Robin Hood, more level things, the tale of two cities, the rich and the rest of us, and the tax would address that, and that if the tax went into pre-K, that people could support it. So I think in the end, he's not going to get the tax, and I guess he'll just blame Albany like mayors have done maybe for 200 or 300 years.
Daniel, let me ask you a similar question. You teach politics, you watch these kinds of struggles. Is it the tax or is it the program? Which is more important to each of them, and how does this get resolved?
Well, I would say that, like most of these things, the two are blended. There's a bit of each. There's a bit of politics and there's a bit of policy. So I think, as Michael was saying, is from the policy side of de Blasio, he ran on this. This was his signature issue. And in that regard, it was a savvy thing to do. In a period of rising inequality, not just in New York, but across the country and across most industrialized countries, he's put his finger on this important theme, and in that regard said, well, I'm going to take more from the wealthy, those who, the haves, and I'm going to give it to people who are struggling and doing less. So that has a little bit of, plays into people's desire to see those at the top brought down a notch, and at the same time, who can be against the kids? A classic political campaign effort, which is we're going to give it not just to people of less means, but to children. So in that sense, the tax really plays heavily into that. Now, whether the tax is necessary, I think even beyond that politically for de Blasio, I think one has to put it in the broader budget context of the city. And that broader budget context is one that's quite tight, where his administration will be renegotiating 152 labor contracts with all of the city's workers. And de Blasio would certainly like some extra revenue to shore himself up in that area as well, in addition to whatever he can get from Albany. So seeing those two things as disconnected, I think, would ignore the broader fiscal reality of the city. On Cuomo's side, partly, I think he doesn't see increasing taxes on the wealthy as what de Blasio says they would be a stable fundraising base. The wealthy's incomes fluctuate enormously with the stock market and probably would be the least stable basis of revenue that could be devised. And second, so that would be on the policy side, and then the governor on the political side has some aspirations, possibly for higher office and seeking potentially the presidency, should Miss Clinton not seek it. And he'd like to be able to run as a moderate and someone who's addressed the tax issue that could really be a centrist candidate in the Democratic Party.
Jaime, why did inequality seize the country? I mean, we're now, almost 35 years into the Reagan Revolution, if you will, and at least progressives have been in retreat or trying to stick their finger in the dike. And it seems to me that de Blasio touched something that, at least in this city, and we're seeing evidence around the country, that people are in fact responding to.
Well, I think that the country is moving slowly but gradually and consistently towards the left. Not like we have been seeing during the last 10, 15 years, which is being, especially in the Democratic Party, center-right. And I think that gradually we're moving more to the liberal side of the Democratic Party. And I think that that is significant. Recently in Seattle, I believe they elected for the first time a socialist as mayor. I don't know if he's in Seattle, but he was definitely in Washington State.
I think he was a city councilor, not he was a city councilman, not the mayor, I believe.
But he got a lot of votes, a lot of support.
But he was a socialist, right?
A socialist.
He's an overt socialist.
And before that, it was basically the senator from Vermont. Now we have another one, city council. Now we have de Blasio, someone who ran in a basically liberal progressive platform, who got elected in New York City after 12 years of someone who went from center to right all the time, Bloomberg. So I think that there is a move to the left, and the issue of inequality is extremely important, not only in the city of New York. If there is a city in the United States that there is a real gap of inequality, the biggest gap is in New York City. Because obviously you have a lot of billionaires living in the city of New York, but you also have a lot of poor people in the city of New York. So that issue is very important. In terms of pre-K, and I continue with the issue of inequality, in terms of pre-K, if you want to define the history of education in the United States, it can be defined with one word, and it's inequality, throughout the history of the public school system in the United States. And if you want to emphasize and be more focused on that issue, go to pre-K. That's where the biggest inequality exists in terms of public schools in the city of New York. I'm a parent, I have 2 public school children. And I remember that I had to go through this process of finding a good pre-K for my daughters. And my wife is a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, and we had difficulties paying for a private pre-K. Then we put our younger daughter in pre-K in a school in Brooklyn, in PH 84. They had a pre-K. The pre-K was only 2 hours and a half. So we left it, and 2 hours and a half later, we have to come back to pick her up and then pay for a babysitter in order to make sure that someone was taking care of her throughout the day. Imagine working class people, poor people, the problems that they have to go day to day. Pre-K is extremely important. Studies have shown consistently that pre-K helped to graduate from high school, to enter college, graduate from college, and to have a profession. Head Start program is the best example of that. It was the first pre-K that ever was created. And arguably, the most people think that is the best federal program ever created, Head Start program. So what we're trying to do in New York City is correct. In terms of the financial aspect, I think that de Blasio is correct in asking for taxing the rich, because in order to have a program like this, there are 52,000 kids that are ready to get pre-K, 52,000. You need a revenue that is consistent. You cannot be playing with these numbers like Cuomo is doing. Cuomo is using $1 billion from a surplus, and now he's saying that he's going to get $7 billion from Medicaid. From cuts that he's going to be making in the state, but we still don't know where those costs come. Right. And then when he produced the bill and he goes and take it to the Senate and the Assembly, you know the story better than me. They're going to chop it. They're going to start cutting, and this is not going to be the program that he wanted.
Listen.
Yes.
All due respect, I'm tired of eating a half a loaf, okay? A half a loaf may be good for you, but I'm starving. And folks that I know are starving and being marginalized, progressives being marginalized for 20 years, from Giuliani through Bloomberg. We've been constantly told, you know, settle down, take that low-wage job. But I think for Cuomo, this is a slippery slope, because you raised something that is fundamental. Cuomo should take yes for an answer when he gives us the power to control our own taxation.
Cuomo or de Blasio?
Cuomo, the state, Cuomo and the state legislature. Because if we win being able to tax folks that are not hurting, and the fluctuation of the stock market that I've seen, with all due respect, Professor, has just been going straight up. If we get this home rule determination, what happens, Bob? What happens to Erstat and us being able to determine our own rent laws? You know, what does happen with stoplights and cameras so that now New York City can address its problems itself? Why is it always coming from on high? And we know the composition of the state legislature. For years, we've had to live with one-house bills in the assembly because we knew that the Republicans controlled the Senate and we could never get anything through. So I do think we're not gonna, it's not gonna be, you know, hosannas and angels coming down from on high. But I do think finally we have a chance to make our own determination and to actually address these problems. And no more half loaves. We're not going to win everything all the time, but at some point, you know, we've got to make up the ground that we've lost under this 20-year marginalization.
But if you're starving, half a loaf is better than nothing.
No, don't tell me that half a loaf is better than nothing. Not when it's stale and it's rotten. You know, you tell me that a low-wage job is better than nothing.
Universal pre-K, guaranteed forever, is stale and rotten. I think the pre-K is fabulous. I was in the same position with my kids who were in New York City public schools. We looked around and said, well, you could have, you know, 1 hour of pre-K, 1 a week over, forget it. We had to pay for nursery school. And they went into kindergarten, and they've been there ever since. Universal.
You've been in kindergarten ever since?
Right. They've been in public school ever since.
They're 18 years old now.
The universal pre-K is great. And as the professor said, who could be against kids? Great, great thing. The idea is, how are you going to get there? And de Blasio, he could establish it tomorrow. Question is, where's the money coming from?
Right.
Cuomo says, I'll give you the money. I didn't say I'm against it. I'm saying Cuomo says you don't need the money. I'm not making the argument. Right. I'm not making any argument here. We make those in the pages of the paper. I'm pointing out that New York City can't do anything. It can't tie its shoes without Albany's permission, okay? Can't sneeze without Albany's permission.
Right, which has to change,
It should change, and you know, you can't have, you can't change the number of taxis in the city. Who runs the subway? That's Albany, okay? Everything goes to Albany, and as you said in the opening, Albany could write a law and say New York City doesn't exist anymore. It's just 5 separate counties. So that is a very hard thing to change. It should be changed. Oh. It should be changed. I don't think it's going to be changed. And it goes back to mayor versus governor, round 200. And you could take every mayor and every governor going back to the British days that they have had butting heads, because the person who you would think has the most clout is the mayor of the biggest city in the country. But the power really lies 150 miles up the river in a little town called Albany, where no one pays attention, and there's legislatures from counties you never heard of who have votes over what we do in this city with CUNY, what we do in this city with how the streets are regulated, how the bridges are regulated, how the schools are regulated. Everything needs to go through them. When we wanted to get rid of the Board of Education, it had to go through Albany. So that, I think, needs to be the focus. How and why, you make a good point, it shouldn't be, but the people in Albany don't want to give up that power. And Shelley Silver, who's the leader of the assembly, says he's an advocate of the city. He doesn't want to give up that power.
Exactly.
And in the Senate, and just last week, another Democrat from the New York City switched sides, went over and said, I'll be with the upstate and suburban Republicans so I can have more power. So the bad guy here is Albany.
Yeah,
we all agree.
But there is something very important.
The show right here.
Let me take you off in terms of the history of mayors, you know, butting heads with the governor. When Dinkins asked for safe seats, safe cities, everybody thought that he wasn't going to get it. And he only had 1 term, and he got it maybe in the first year of his term. Bloomberg asked for mayor control. Everybody thought that he wasn't going to get it. And he went and he got it. So it's true what you're saying. There's going to be headbutts, there's going to be a real debate on this issue, but there are precedents in which these things have been accomplished, even when everybody bet that they were not going to happen. I'm not saying that this is going to happen this time, but there are precedents. I think that de Blasio is going to have an offensive in Albany that is going to include the Working Family Party. It's going to include maybe 100 association of parents, not only in the city, but throughout the state. They already lined up like 20 or 25 high caliber celebrities.
Absolutely.
Plus the UFT. All these people are going to be going to Albany. All politics are local. I have always believed in that. And they are going to be putting pressure on all these legislators in order to try to get this. It's going to be a real battle, but even if Cuomo wins, and this is my take, I think that he's not going to look that good, because most parents in New York State, they want pre-K, but especially in New York City, which is the largest block. If he wants to get reelected, he needs New York City.
Well,
more than he needs
But if I might put a little note of skepticism here, New York City is, just to put things in perspective, both historical and across the country, New York City is almost unique among cities in having its own income tax to start with. So this notion that it should have obviously control over this, it's already in a kind of unique category in this regard. The second point one might make is the city, when it was more autonomous and controlled more of its own finances, proved itself irresponsible, which is why the MTA and other things, it's called the crisis of the 1970s. And that's why the city lost a lot of its control, is in part because it wasn't able to fully govern itself. And so there might be some trepidation, rightly so, beyond the power politics. And I guess before we all just jump on the bandwagon and sign off on pre-K, I think just a note of caution. I mean, I think we're all for helping out parents and certainly helping out disadvantaged parents in finding solutions for childcare. But what do we really want from childcare besides it becoming, no disrespect,
Don't
but a
so
baby.
talk about a big babysitting thing.
But a babysitting
not.
service
No.
for middle-class parents. What we want it to be is something that brings up parents, children who are in more difficult circumstances, and brings them up into the same kind of cognitive situation, the kind of behavioral abilities as kids who are growing up in more stable family situations, financially, socially, and so on. The issue is that I think that, in contrast to what Jaime suggested, I think the social science research is much more divided on this, especially on Head Start, which is the largest and most well-studied program. It's not clear that we really know today actually how to design a good program that's going to be a high-quality program. Everyone says, well, we want pre-K, but we want high-quality pre-K, and it's really important to pay attention to that word, because we actually don't, I don't think yet, know exactly what to do to design a program that's going to really lift those youngsters who are coming in from more difficult circumstances, have the benefits of that program endure beyond the second or third grade, where we see Head Start fades out and most of the benefits, at least in terms of their scholarly achievements in elementary school, are concerned.
That's true, and
Well,
it is just not true. There are numerous studies that show how development goes with kids, and it is best to start at pre-K. But what if, forget pre-K, what if from K to 3, which all educators and scientists have said these are the formative years, and kids sort themselves out in grade 4. What if the whole curriculum from K to 3 were across the board gifted curriculum? So all the babies start out the same, even to try that. But to say, oh, we don't know what quality is, I bet you if you could sit down with any parent where I live in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and they can tell you straight out what quality is. I just think that we like to dibble and nibble around the margins. This whole pre-K that we have now, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, that's already the half loaf again. I'm not saying that every single thing, we're going to win every single thing to get control. And we do need to learn from mistakes and the corruption from the past. But just on this one alone, we want to pay for it ourselves. We want to make sure that it's steady. We want to make sure that we don't take a big budget hit here in New York City. Everyone is for it, and is vitally important because of the changing demographics of not only this city, but of this country. This country will be very shortly, if not already, a majority-minority country, a new majority, where most of our kids going to the public school system will be black and brown. And so therefore, I think we have to double down and recommit to it. This pre-K thing is the test. It is the test about whether Cuomo cares really about black and brown kids in New York City, whether he really cares about education. Cuomo right now should pay up for the CFE, Campaign for Fiscal Equity. The judge has already ruled. Where's that money, Andrew? So I don't trust I don't trust the governor. I don't trust him because of CFE, and I certainly am not going to trust him to provide this money.
CFE is the lawsuit that forced a change in the funding formulas to treat the city schools with more equity, while the suburban schools were getting disproportionately more than we were per student.
Right.
While this fight was going on early on, I guess in January, I can't remember if it was January or February, Dutchess County went up there and said, we want to add a penny to our sales tax to pay for certain local matters. Now, it's a little bit different because that was a tax that had existed and it expired in November. But they reauthorized, they said, okay, Dutchess, you can tax yourself for whatever, I can't remember exactly what the purposes were. Is there a difference there? Should Dutchess have been allowed to, if Dutchess was allowed to do it, why shouldn't we be able to tax ourselves?
the city is already taxing itself, but setting its own tax rates is, I guess, the political question of whether the city can do that.
Well, they allowed Dutchess to set its own tax rate in terms of raising its sales tax.
And does Dutchess have the same fiscal history as New York City?
New York City, I mean, I would argue with you that since the fiscal crisis, New York City, with its 4-year budgeting, has balanced its budget every year and has a much better budgetary record than Albany has had. I mean, or that almost any other governmental entity that you want to look to. In fact, because of the discipline imposed on the city by the state in the aftermath of the fiscal crisis, we're a paragon of virtue. You know, compared to every other government, and I mean that seriously. And so there is a Dr. Heal Thyself argument to be aimed at Albany.
Well,
I think we would also want to say,
obviously.
also that I don't think de Blasio is asking for, or at least when I watched his testimony in Albany, he's not asking for authority to going forward to set income tax rates in the city. What he's asking for is only for the state legislature to approve a tax hike on those. That is, he's not setting up a conflict over taxing authority. He's only asking for the state legislature to approve an increase.
Don't you think he would? Don't you think every mayor has wanted more control of the city's affairs?
I'm sure most mayors do, but I don't think that's an issue today. I mean, they may want that, and certainly mayors would like more control over things, and there may be a very good argument for that, but I don't think that that's on the agenda today.
It is hypocritical of Albany, but that's Albany. I mean, you know, how many people in Dutchess County? 200 or something like that? I'm sorry if anyone in Dutchess is watching, but it's the scope of it and the scale of it. That New York City is, yes, another locality, but it is vastly different. There are dozens, if not hundreds of state laws which apply to cities with more than 1 million people.
Which is us.
Which is just New York City. Now, it's not just another city. It's not just Troy. Or
which has been in the dumper, which has been broke.
Or all of Upstate, except for areas around Albany, has been in terrible condition for maybe 40 or 50 years. And in fact, that law, which is in, you know, this shall apply to cities over more than 1 million, it used to say 2 million. But because Buffalo's population in the 1950s was peaking at 800,000, so they said, we'll make this 2 million, and now Buffalo's down to half of that, so no other city is going to get close to 1 million. So it is hypocritical, but the city and the state are so intertwined. New York City provides, I don't know, 45% of the state's revenue.
Exactly.
So you're upstate.
That, right.
When you're upstate and you're driving on a road, the road you're driving on was paid for by New York City taxpayers, these billionaires and the rest of us who are paying income tax to New York State. New York City sends much more money to Albany than it gets back. I would say that's okay. We have the money. They don't. We're overall much wealthier than the rest of the state, so we should share some of the wealth. I don't think de Blasio is going to win this one in the end. Cuomo doesn't want to do it in an election year. He's going to win New York City's vote. He's going to win, as you said, black and brown people who do go out to vote. They're not going to vote for Donald Trump or any other Republican who thinks he's running. And Cuomo is seeking votes in the suburbs if he wants to go on a national scale. The Senate, controlled by this weird combination of turncoat Democrats and Republicans, is not going to do it, even though the Democratic head of this two-headed monster, Jeff Klein from the Bronx, wants to do it, and he was the guy who raised the Ulster thing. He raised it, but then in the end he folded.
Ulster, I'm sorry. Ulster, I apologize.
But then in the end he folded. He said, okay, they can have it.
Whatever.
We will know soon enough. This is early March. We will know. My prediction is that de Blasio will not get the tax.
But isn't it an argument as a political matter? I mean, one of the
But he may get the pre-K.
One of the points you made about that, you know, maybe there were problems with Head Start, maybe pre-K doesn't produce as good results as some people say it is. You know, there's if you extend that argument out, there's an argument for doing nothing because you're making the perfect the enemy of the good. I mean, you can see people who stop development because it's not exactly the development that they want. So how do you carry that? I mean, are you saying because it's not perfect, we shouldn't be funding pre-K?
No, what I was just introducing was a note of skepticism that of what kind of results one might expect from pre-K, and that there's been so much debate over the politics that there's been less attention to the policy side of what do we really want to, what do we expect expanding pre-K to do, let's say on de Blasio's agenda of reducing inequality. In an ideal world, you'd have a high-quality pre-K program that would bring up the students or the young people from families of more modest means to those of the level of middle-class parents in terms of their cognitive abilities, the things that they know when they're entering kindergarten, their social and impulse control capacities, and that those things would then carry over long-term to better outcomes in terms of graduating high school, avoiding arrests, going on to college. The issue is that I think the social science research doesn't show us, at least even at the point of, say, 3rd to 4th grade, clear results from, say, Head Start. And maybe we need to be thinking and talking more about the design of some of these programs. Maybe one of the failings of Head Start is that it is primarily a program targeted for people of lesser means. And maybe if we had programs that integrated people of more middle class situations with people of more modest means and had them in the same thing, that there would be positive effects of that mixing. I'm saying the social science research just isn't clear, and not that we should do nothing, but we should be really thinking about the design issues.
Well, I don't think that there is, you were saying that there is not enough evidence to go one way or the other, and then you say that Head Start is a failing program. I think that that's a little bit of a contradiction. If anything, if one of the programs, federal programs that have never been touched by Republicans, has been Head Start, historically, has always been kept there. They criticize Medicare, they criticize Medicaid, they criticize Social Security, that by the way people pay for it, it's not a subsidy, people are paying for it. Head Start has never been mentioned, and study after study, this is the first time I hear that Head Start has been a failure. I just want to mention that.
It was never a failure in my
Did you say that it was the failing of Head Start?
I didn't say it was a failure.
You're
I
saying
said
it's
that
not produced as much as some people claim it has.
Right, and I'm citing a study conducted, the most rigorous study conducted by the federal government itself in one of its biggest evaluations of a federal program. I don't think that there's, and that Head Start has been one of the most extensively studied by social scientists because it's a long-standing program. It offers lots of different ways to design rigorous social science experiments around. And I think that overall the research just doesn't give us a commanding feeling. I'm not saying it's a failure, and that doesn't mean that with social science research that some students haven't profited enormously. But in the aggregate, it hasn't produced results that are commanding that we think are going to be just terrific, and I think more attention needs to be paid.
I don't really have dueling studies because there are studies that I can cite that totally contradict that, and also some flaws in the methodology and who was studied and what was studied and why. And again, people always accuse me of injecting race into everything, but race does matter in who these programs are directed to and how they are studied and what resources are put into that, what kind of analysis is done, is in question. So I don't want to talk about dueling studies. What I really do want to talk about is the dynamic here between upstate and downstate and this new wave of progressivity. I believe that Cuomo is, whether he wins or not, he's going to, there's some of us who are going to bring the ruckus because this guy has not been, doesn't have a shred of progressivity. He is very calculating. He, the folks up in Albany and folks that should be running this, I mean, the caucus has the most members, the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus, is a huge voting bloc. And yet, they will not defy him. I think that if de Blasio is allowed to win on anything, the dam breaks open. So, he's right. He's right. I mean, those of us on the outside have formed and are still growing an enormous coalition.
What about?
And we are going to go upstate, and we are going to challenge these folks in these elections this year. We're bringing New York City to the doors of these upstate guys. and say, okay, we're going to bring the ruckus right into your district. You didn't think you would ever see us. And we have to put up a gargantuan fight.
And some of those
we
guys
will.
are in the 5 boroughs.
Absolutely. And we know who they are and where they live.
I'm not sure. I certainly.
You heard that out there.
I think your criticism of the governor is lacking any progressivity is probably a bit overstated. But one of the governor's arguments, whether you think it's clever, disingenuous, or real, is an argument. Is in fact the argument of a tale of two states. Of the argument that kids in Rochester, kids in Syracuse, kids in parts of Buffalo, kids across the southern tier, which have been denuded of the jobs that 50 years ago sustained. It was kind of the foundry of America. That by allowing us to do it, we would be on our own would somehow damage their ability to keep up with us.
He should help them. He should help them. We want to pay our own way. We're freeing him up to use that other
That's
money,
the
which is
argument
part of our money.
That's actually the argument of Upstate papers. That's actually the argument of Upstate papers.
Well, he should help them. And I think it's a cogent argument. We're not trying to freeload here. We're not trying to say we're going to do a clawback. We actually are saying we want to be self-sufficient. We are willing to pay our way. When we ask for other things, traditionally, it has always been, oh, you want to take money out of somebody else's coffers, and no, you don't want to pay your way. Now we're saying, let us pay our way, and he can't take yes for an answer. So I think he should help them. He should do more upstate for pre-K, but he doesn't have to worry about us. We got this.
And that would represent some savings for these states too.
We got it.
Yes, sir. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Norris James. I'm from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And my question to the panel is, what if Governor Cuomo's public financing agenda gets passed for 2014?
Public
financing
of
proposal?
Campaigns.
Yes, if it gets passed, like, what would that mean for the Bill de Blasio's administration?
That would be a good thing, I think. And it also, what is happening here, folks, believe me, folks are taking these polls and they're saying, oh, well, the rich don't mind. They don't mind getting taxed. Yes, they do. And part of this whole pushback is this underground pushback from the rich. Public financing in Albany, please, Andrew, let us get public financing. It changes the entire equation. It changes everything.
He supports it.
And he should make sure that it goes through.
Well, he says he supports it, but he's outraised, he's $33 million in his pocket,
yes.
and he's raising it in chunks of $50,000.
Yeah.
So he says, public financing for them,
Probably not for
over there, later, not me, not this year. Let me win again. So I think if he was to say, I will limit my spending this year to whatever my Republican opponent has and spend not a dollar more, I think he'd have a better argument that he's not.
What differences does public financing make?
Well, it makes a difference because if Michael Bloomberg could spend $110 million
On each election almost.
on his last election, maybe $400 or $500 million in total, he can buy every second of every television channel for the past, for the 3 months before the election, and his opponent could spend, 1% of that. And we're on television right now. People see it. It's advertisement. It helps shape the perceptions. In this past mayoral election, Chris Quinn and Bill de Blasio and Billy Thompson and Anthony Weiner, not John Liu, he was kind of sandbagged, all had the same amount of money. Even in the general, the amount of money between Joe Lhota, who was destroyed in the end, wasn't vastly different than what Bill de Blasio. So the argument for public financing is kind of a leveling that
and we've seen it, I think, in the city council, which has brought a whole new much
it doesn't
more diverse,
always
I don't mean
work,
diverse
but
ethnically, diverse
but
politically.
it has some benefits, and Cuomo's going to have $33 million. And his opponent, maybe will have, what, a tenth of that?
But there's, I mean,
that's another program.
Is
But
there a danger of Citizens United? I mean, the argument of Citizens United almost seems that it probably ultimately could undercut limits even in New York City.
Well, partly, I don't mean to always be raining on the parade up here, but but it
One of the
seems like
reasons you're here.
right. So at least I'm doing my duty. Even a public financing measure is not going to be able to stop a self-financing candidate from spending however much they would like, because trying to do that would run afoul of the First Amendment.
Right, but the only one we've had is Michael Bloomberg. Andrew Cuomo is not self-financing. He's going, give me $50,000, give me $50,000, give me $50,000. Sure. And he's gotten lots of those checks of $50,000.
And sometimes you have very wealthy self-financing candidates, need I mention Carl Palladino, who don't do as well despite spending a lot of their own money. I think the benefits of this reform, were it to pass, would be part of a larger package of what the governor has tried to do, which is some kind of ethics reform in Albany, which has had over the last 2 decades or so a dismal record of public corruption in many cases, and bringing a little bit more sanity to the way campaigns are financed and then the way politicians go about creating some networks.
Yes, sir.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Steven. I'm from John Jay College, and I just wanted to ask if you guys think that the mayor's minimum wage proposal would pit Albany against the city. Do you think that's an Albany issue?
It certainly has, and the governor argues
it's the
that
same argument.
The governor makes the argument that if New York City is allowed to raise its minimum wage, it would. This one I don't understand. It would somehow, I don't know, I guess give us an advantage in luring workers. I'm not sure. He also said that it would be kind of a pitting different parts of the state against each other. I'm not sure. Well, but it seems like that would be a race to the top instead of a race to the bottom. So I'm not quite sure how that works.
But there was a report recently, and I can quote it, that most cities and counties, they would like to have also the ability to impose a minimum wage in their localities. There was a Siena College poll yesterday that basically states that there is a lot of support for minimum wage, not only for New York City, but for different counties. I think that around 84% of Democrats are for it, 75 of independent, and 46 to 48 of Republicans, almost 50% of Republicans, which is surprising, are in favor of having some type of allowing the city of New York and other counties to impose their own minimum wage.
The Daily News has led the charge on airport workers and on the kind of inequity, the inequality implications of airlines and airports contracting out to people who pay their people minimum wage, and has kind of helped force them to raise people's wages $1, $1.50 an hour.
Well, I mean,
bravo. By the way,
well, it's not the Daily News. It's we think it's basic economics. That if you have an adult who is working full time, they should be able to make enough money to support themselves, and without having to rely on food stamps or other government benefits. And if the minimum wage is set at $8, or I think now it's $8 in New York now, right? The federal minimum wage is $7.25. You do the math; it doesn't come to enough. It doesn't come to enough for hardly anything. And the minimum wage has lost so much ground in the past 40 or 50 years in terms of what's needed. So the real minimum wage, if it had kept pace, would be, I don't know,
11,
$10 or $11, which still, you multiply it out, it's not going to make you rich. But there's a difference between, $16,000 a year to live on and $20,000 a year to live on. And this is in a city where the median wage is, I don't know, $30,000 or something like that. So the Daily News has, supported a higher minimum wage. We criticized Cuomo when he wouldn't support the higher amount. In terms of the city having a minimum wage, I'd go for the whole loaf. I'd say just make a minimum wage for the whole state, and
index it to inflation. But also we should not be having low-wage workers on the front lines at the airport if we value and we talk about having security. When you've got somebody making $8 an hour and then they're supposed to look out to make the airport safe and secure, those two just don't go together.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Eric Dorstein from Queens College. I just wanted to get your five's opinion on what does it mean that that Senator Avila has joined the state Senate's Independent Democracy Caucus.
Senator Avila is
Maverick. That's
maverick
his word.
is the word. Yes, he certainly marches to his own drummer. There is. I talked to one person, one Democrat in Albany today, who said that good, let them deal with Tony Avila. But I mean, the larger issue is that you actually have had what was it, 33 Democrats elected, I believe is the number, as opposed to 25 Republicans to the state Senate. There were a couple of vacancies, but yet the Republicans, along with these Democrats, control the chamber.
They find a way. They find a way.
Yeah.
They buy people off, or whatever they do, they persuade them, and they stay in power, because the way it works in Albany, it is all or nothing. If you are in the political minority in Albany, you might as well not even show up. You are not going to have anything. You're not going to have offices. You're not going to have pencils, which is true. There have been lawsuits about that.
Yeah.
You're not going to have access to staff. You can't introduce legislation. You might as well go home. So each side will do absolutely everything to maintain power, and including a couple of years ago, they had this crazy coup and they were fighting because it's such a, they don't compromise. Instead of having a normal legislature, which is, in most of the country exists, where you have some back and forth, it's the ins and the outs. And that it makes it harder for de Blasio to win his case in Albany, or any mayor, because it's a one-man operation, or a two-headed man in one house. And once that guy decides,
still men, and it's still all men.
Oh, it's all men.
Right.
More women in politics, absolutely needed.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Carlos Soto from Medgar College. My question is, does Mayor de Blasio's support for the DREAM Act mean that it has a better chance in Albany?
Same answer.
Same, yeah.
Well, like I said before, all politics are local. That depends on how much support can get de Blasio from the city, especially from the city, which is where most of the documented are, in order to make sure that that is passed. I think that Skelos already said that he's not even going to bring it to a vote, which that is a problem. The governor is for it, Silver is for it, de Blasio is for it. Before, 3 people decided the budget of the city of New York and all the legislature, now it's 4 people. I think that the only person opposing it is Skelos, and I think that that's a big problem, because he won't allow it to come to a vote.
But here's
but
where the
hopefully,
independent caucus comes in,
They say
and
they're
where
for
they
it, yeah.
could actually do it. And Klein could put it and go around Skelos and, flex a little muscle. This is where, if they really are for it, this is having that block
all
of
politics
votes
are local.
really counts. But again, I don't think that the DREAM Act goes far enough, because I've been organizing Caribbean teachers that were brought here, recruited here, highly advanced degrees. And 12 years after they got here, still no green card, which they were promised. Still no support from the Department of Education. In the meantime, their children who came with them aged out. That means that they turned 21 before their parents got their green card. So they ostensibly became undocumented. They're invisible because their visa overstays. They came here legally. They are not included in the DREAM Act. And we've been trying to push that. So, I applaud the Assembly for doing it. They need to amend the bill to include some more diverse folks. But I think Klein could bring it to the floor.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shinsia Jared. I'm from CUNY School of Professional Studies, and I have 2 questions. My first question has to do with what you just spoke about in concerning illegals. The first question is, if de Blasio's plea is accepted by Albany, how long will it take for Board of Ed to implement the universal program?
The universal pre-K program. Well, the operational question has been a subject of great debate. I mean, it's a very ambitious
Well,
It's a very ambitious undertaking
Says he
to try
wants
to
to
get
double
this
it for
working
September.
by September.
But that's not a full.
No, it's got to phase in over
and
5 years.
they got to find the teachers,
And they have to
yeah,
find
but
location.
there were
and they got to find the classrooms.
Right.
Yeah, I
And
think
then
that
they
they
got to
need
find the transportation to move these kids. I mean, it's a lot.
yeah, Daily News today, I think it was the Daily News that said that de Blasio already identified more classrooms that he needed, and I think that he will have them ready within a year. He didn't explain how he found them, but he basically said that within a year he will have them. And also they need around 2,000 teachers for around 56,000 kids or 4-year-old. So, you know, that's a big endeavor. But he already said that, yes, that it can be done.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and the second question is a follow-up. Although Cuomo assures a budget for universal pre-K, do you think the budget estimates the variability of illegal immigrants who will be enrolled into the universal pre-K program in addition?
I'm not sure. Maybe you know better.
Can you
I don't-
say that?
I'm not sure
wanted
that we
to-
make it, that we in New York State or New York City would draw a distinction between an undocumented child.
We have never done
No,
that.
That's right.
I do not
I'm
mean
sorry.
to make.
That's
I do
right.
not mean to assume. I wanted to know, in the population that is allocated for universal pre-K, is that something that that the government has enough funding?
No, New York
Because-
City, if there is a city that has always been extremely good to undocumented people, has been New York City. That has never been an issue to this day. Who goes in terms of to the public schools, undocumented children, they're accepted. And even Giuliani, and it's difficult for me to say, even Giuliani was very good at that.
There's a higher authority. I mean, the
Yeah.
Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme
Yeah.
Court has ruled a child here has to go to public school. And it doesn't matter how the child got here
Yeah.
and what the child's parents are doing and the child's legal immigration status. And because Texas wanted to exclude kids, the Supreme Court said no. The kid's here, send them to school.
I'm not trying to be PC, sister, but no human being is illegal. They're undocumented. They might not have papers, but also de Blasio has a full sort of program, driver's licenses, and he actually
And a city ID card,
and a city
City
ID card. So
which I've
rather-
always been uncomfortable with on civil liberties grounds.
Well, but
Let me
we're
see your
trying to base
papers.
it. But the thing is that he actually has a full 5-point program, and so it is true in our public school system. If you're undocumented, you know you get a right to do this, to have this education. Now, a controversy has come up, a little tiny one, about undocumented in charter schools and whether these charter schools are as welcoming as they claim. But that's for another show.
Yes, sir. We got about 3 minutes left. So.
My name is Norris James. I'm from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. So I learned in my political science class that cities are but creatures of the state and cities compete. If we go along with de Blasio's plan, Mayor de Blasio's plan to tax the rich to fund the pre-K program, wouldn't that drive out investors and affect the employment rate in New York City?
They ain't going nowhere.
I would say
You're going to move to Troy.
no. I mean,
You're right.
your question is an excellent one. New York State and New York City combined have some of the highest tax rates in the United States for high earners, and this would only make that burden higher. It's often said in the newspapers and elsewhere, and the governor himself says it, well, if you continue to raise taxes on the highest earners, they'll move to Florida, they'll move to other states, they'll shuffle their income around so it doesn't appear as income. And those are real concerns, I think. But most of the people who are very wealthy in New York City are very committed to New York. They're philanthropic, they're good citizens, they do a lot of great things for the city, and they're committed to being here. So I don't think there would be a mass exodus. However, I do think that there is a slight issue of relying too much on tax revenue simply from people making over $500,000. The city currently, about 43% of tax revenue for New York City comes from people making $500,000 or above. And they tend to have very unstable incomes that fluctuate a lot with the stock market. It may be doing fine now,
To be
but
unstable with 500,000.
it may be doing fine now. The issue is that may be on a personal basis, but if we just recall the recession that we just went through, top income people's incomes declined dramatically, and what happened? State and city tax revenues went through the floor as well. So it's a very unstable and, you know, not to get too technical, but pro-cyclical, which is bad, economic policy for the distribution of your tax revenues.
I think that New York has, by definition, added value. And, you know, certainly the federal tax burden is, what, 1/2 of what it was 40 years ago for people and for the top earners in the
35%.
Well, and it was about 70%. You know, the highest incremental rate was up at 70% at one.
The marginal rate hasn't changed enormously, or you know, the effective tax rate hasn't changed a lot, even though the marginal rate was much higher.
And we only have a minute left. Would people flee if this tax went up? It's 1/2 of 1% for 5 years.
No, I don't think anyone's going to move.
No, they need Broadway.
This is.
Well, you can come from Jersey to Broadway.
and they need CUNY TV. You're not going to get that if you leave the city.
There you go.
De Blasio makes the argument. You know, it comes to $5 a day or something like that.
A latte. The cost of a latte.
Latte.
Right.
And but it's a political argument, and that, you know, Cuomo is arguing against de Blasio, and he has the power. De Blasio, we'll see what happens, but
I think we'll win.
Well, I think that I only have about 15 seconds left, so I'm not going to try to fill those 15 seconds. I mean, it seems to me that the fight between the governor and the mayor at this point is kind of more interesting because they were such good friends and political allies for so many years that there's a personal overlay that goes along with this, and I think that I also think that there are times when, even if you don't win the fight, that very often the fight is worth making. I want to thank everybody. We will see you next time on CUNY Forum.